Welcome back to the And I Hate podcast, a forum to discuss and combat student hate. Today we are here with Ben Hagwood, a person of color who is heavily involved with debate. Ben has coached at multiple debate academies, coaching students that have won prestigious tournaments like Harvard and Stanford. So Ben, just welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here. And can you go ahead and give a quick introduction of yourself, because that brief little blip did not do you justice.
Well, I'm excited to be here with you, Michi, and to discuss race. My name is Benjamin Hagwood. I am the director at the Vancouver Debate Academy, and I've been involved in debate for about 2 decades now. I've taught at the college level and have helped students use different arguments that some would say were personally kind of inspired. So really focused on them, kind of just self-discovery in the process of kind of understanding how they exist socially. And at the college level, that is part of the frontline movement, so to speak, of the way that we really think of that. But currently now I focus on helping students in secondary school or high school get to college and use debate as a vehicle for that. So that's kind of my background that I do now. And I still coach. I enjoy it. I think it's one of the most rigorous and entertaining activities. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
That's great. It sounds like you have a lot of experience in this activity at a bunch of different levels. So out of all of that experience, this is kind of a tough question, but what would you consider your greatest achievement or proudest moment in debate, whether as a competitor or a coach?
That is a tough question. Give me a second. You said my proudest moment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's not actually that hard. See, I heard it as achievement, but a moment, the proudest moment I've ever had was, and it used to happen all the time when I was teaching at the college level. I haven't got there yet here, but when students graduate is my proudest moment, actually. Coaching debate is, in my opinion, a kind of more interpersonal educator position, because we have to watch students struggle with concepts that can be foreign to them, but also struggle with the way people engage them personally. So we're still educators, but we're competitors too at the same time. But for me, winning is a goal that I have to just push myself. But the proudest I've ever been was when I've had students graduate that no one thought would graduate. That's definitely been the proudest moment so far.
That makes a lot of sense. And you do talk about like success and achievement in this activity and how it can empower students. Why does success in this activity help students?
Okay, so there's 2 reasons why success directly translates into kind of a motivator for students, which the motivator is what I think really helps students. The first one is success solidifies for a student that they are, valuable, that the activity, that they're smart, I would say, for some students. A lot of people struggle with imposter syndrome, and in that moment they often think they're not worthy of being in the spaces they're in. Some of them may be their first year in college. So it's not really a sense of worthiness from an external position, but I think there's some internal affirmation that begins to happen when they find success in doing something that they enjoy or that they're talking about. And the second one is, from an argumentative perspective, it forces others to engage your conversation, which is huge. The way a debate tournament works and functions is, the more you win, the more you continue to debate. Right? Your days get longer and longer. And if you're making arguments that you feel are truly valuable, then winning allows you to make those arguments to a larger group of people, because as the day goes on, less and less people are debating.
Mm-hmm.
So now you can go to a tournament like Harvard or like Stanford, like Georgetown, like the Barclay Forum, and you have 500 teams entered in a division, and they're not debating anymore. It's 2 teams left. Mm-hmm. So success gives you it gives some of that internal affirmation, but it also gives a platform for you to kind of develop and share your perspective with the world. that not a lot of other, activities do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you talk about this platform. What are some examples of arguments that students read when they're in these, late rounds that are being watched by all of the other opponents and stuff like that? What kinds of arguments are really important to hear?
I don't know if I would put I don't know if I would rank them in importance. I don't know if I would rank them about which ones we should prioritize versus not prioritize. So I don't know if I would rank them per se. Um, I think it's important when we're at a competition first to be able to have conversations about the way the topic that we've determined matters. Now that looks different to different people, you know. So I would start there primarily because you have to create a conversation point. So there has to be something that we can discuss. Now the interpretation of what that means is always fluid and flexible, and that's the beauty of debate, I think. But when it the deeper you get into elimination rounds, I think the real test is the refinement of your argument, like not necessarily the topic. Whether you want to talk about, you know, the way that we can orient our politics towards the world when we recognize, the genocide of indigenous populations, when we recognize the violent history of slavery, or we recognize the categorical exclusion of women or of people of Chinese descent, and are people that are, differently abled. The particular of what we're talking about, I don't think is as important as being able to understand that in the particular discussion we're having. So the topic discussion, and then your ability to refine it. So I would say probably that's the two most important things is the process of figuring out what you want to talk about. But I also gave some examples in there of the different topics you can hear. Like I said, it's very common now to have conversations about colonialism and indigeneity. It's very common to have conversations about gender or sexual politics and the way that we kind of orient ourselves in the world. It's very common to have conversations, or you may hear an argument about race, which is very popular. Different forms of race arguments or ability arguments. So there's a plethora of arguments you can hear. And what we're beginning to explore in debate is that students are becoming more interested in understanding the way that kind of power operates in the world. And that's really what we begin to see interrogated in elimination debates. And sometimes in prelims, in the college level, you may see that every round. At the high school level, it is reserved for certain formats, because some formats you won't be able to have that kind of argument flexibility, but college policy, you definitely have it.
That makes sense. Yeah. So I find it really interesting to talk about that you phrase a lot of these issues as questions of structures of power. So, what are some benefits of students talking about such complex issues in this kind of space?
Understood. Again, I think it's very similar to what I said earlier about internal, um, and then also just external. I think debate in any context when you're having to deal with socially complex issues. So let's say you want to talk about race, then it is extremely difficult if you do not view yourself as a minority to have a conversation about race generally. And most people don't receive that training. One of the biggest benefits of debate is you have to deal with it. You cannot run. You have to figure out how to answer, how to explain, how to reorient your politics, right? How to be comfortable in certain spaces. And I think that adaptation that takes place, the process of thinking through that, that adaptation is one of the most valuable things that debate gives students. It gives them training for kind of social situations that they'll be in. And you can take that and you can apply it in the classroom, you can apply it in the boardroom, you can apply it, on the basketball court, kind of wherever you are. And that becomes the most valuable thing, I think, for discussing them. Sorry.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Do you think that I don't want to say forcing, because that sounds like a violent word, but do you think that making people have these kind of uncomfortable conversations and forcing them to engage with this kind of stuff has led to any kind of positive effects? And if so, what are the positive effects?
I believe there are several studies that actually talk about this. it's a double-edged sword. There's a couple of studies. I'm trying to remember the authors' names. I'm gonna beat myself over this. I'm gonna beat myself up over this as soon as we get off because I'm gonna remember who they are. But it's generally a double-edged sword. So there are definitely positive benefits of it. But with any struggle that takes place, right, with any type of pushback against a normative standard of what we're doing, there's also battle fatigue that exists. So before I talk about the kind of benefits of why it's good, I think it's important to acknowledge that to students that go through this kind of intellectual labor, this performative labor, it is not done without kind of a cost or a weight that is added to them. And that's a very important distinction to make when we begin to think about how it could be beneficial to create social situations in which it forces people to learn. So now the benefits after that disclaimer, so to speak. The benefits would be the first one, and I mentioned this earlier too, was this social experiments that you get to experience. If you've never been called, a landowner, or if you've never stopped and realized that you're working in an organization where it's all males and you are also a male and you identify as a male and everyone identifies as a male and there's no alternative perspectives with that organization, with that group, then you won't recognize and realize how to work in diverse spaces. And really, life, I think, is about being able to navigate social situations and operate in diverse spaces. I don't think we get the luxury of always being able to be around people that make us feel comfortable. And debate forces us to recognize that. Having to debate people that have a radically different view on life, not just the topic, on life, forces students to get an entire another level of education and exposure that you cannot get from a textbook. You will not get from your lesson that you're sitting in a classroom learning about, human psychology and human behavior. You're right. You could learn some things, right? You could learn the structure of it, but you're not experiencing it. And it's just true that when your body experiences something, right? It's way different. It's way different. I also think it's important that we introduce students to concepts they may not agree with, but then we debate over, at times factual information. So statistic driven information that can easily change someone's opinion. I one of my students once asked me, he said, Mr. Hagwood, why do you think that debating this, having to debate against anti-Blackness, for instance, would be useful to me? Like, I just want to be a pastor. I'm not anti-Black. Like, I think that's against, everything I believe in to be racist. And I said, that sounds great. I said, the problem is a lot of people they're unable to see what's happening, or they're unable to because they don't experience it, right? It's not bodily. So in a debate round, now it may be bodily, but not only is that experience good, what happens is they begin to present you with evidence. Right? If we're talking about how great the church is, but they can provide evidence that shows that the church you're defending had slaves. And although you may not be anti-Black, you are benefiting from the byproducts of that particular anti-Blackness. Or if you could do it with other ways, that's kind of the second benefit of it, right? And I think that's why it really becomes persuasive to a lot of people, and it becomes difficult to navigate through life and to say things like gender, race, sexuality, ability don't matter. Because most people say that because they're not experiencing, again, bodily, right? And I think when we begin to acknowledge that, debate forces us to really kind of grapple with it and try to find solutions.
That makes a lot of sense. So you briefly mentioned before addressing the benefits of this that sometimes bringing up these issues is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
What are some of the harms of reading these kinds of arguments or bringing up these kinds of issues? And who does it harm the most? Like, does it harm the person who's bringing it up, or does it harm the other individuals who are engaging in the discussion?
That's a good question. So the first question was, I'm sorry, hold on. Yeah, hold on. I want to write these down because I want to answer them. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. I get this pen out.
No problem.
Oh, where is it? Okay. So there are the negative benefits, the negative are the harms of it. So your question is, who does it harm? And then out of that category, who's harmed the most by it overall?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see here. Who's harmed? And then I'll say way. All right. So who's harmed the most by, or who's harmed by these arguments? I don't know how to give a definitive answer for that. Like, I don't know that it's just one person or two people.
Yeah.
I would, I mean, but I will say this. I know that when students make arguments like this in a debate,
Mhm.
your argument is either accepted as something that can be evaluated, or it's rejected completely. Right?
Yeah.
So in the moment that you get up and you say that you really want to talk about this social issue,
Mhm.
or you really want to talk about this argument, it doesn't have to be a social issue. It can just be an argument about why policy, is bad, but it
Yeah.
takes a look at a certain group of people. And the judge just tells you, well, I don't really care about that. That's not what I came to watch. So I'm voting for the other team.
Mhm.
Or the judge tells you they don't believe the things you're saying. Then
Yeah.
the harm that generally happens is the students. So what we
Mhm.
find is that there are less and less students every year kind of matriculating from high school to college doing debate that are making these type of arguments, not because they're not going to college, just because they're burnt out of debate. Their belief is that the system in and of itself is only producing the same sort of hate and exclusionary practices that they experience in high school. So why continue doing in college?
Yeah. That makes sense.
It's no purpose, right? So
Mhm.
it feels like that's the harm. Now, obviously, there can be byproducts of that harm, which means that students can quit during the year. So that could hurt their potential partner that wanted to continue the debate. So there's some of that harm, residual harm that can exist. But I think that the actual harm that I was referencing is ultimately that students feel that the space is not conducive to kind of accepting them, to accepting their perspective. And they kind of just move on from the space.
That makes a
So
lot of
yeah, so that harm and the trauma that comes along with that is kind of what I was referencing earlier.
Very well said. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Less of a harm to individuals, but rather a harm to the community and the activity and kind of like kind of what debate represents as a platform for students to bring up issues that they care about. So
Mhm.
that being said, how can debate become a more inclusive space to prevent this kind of burnout and to prevent students from quitting the activity out of frustration or feeling like they're not heard?
That's a very abstract question. um, because each event is different.
Mhm.
So I don't think there's a single solution. We could say something flowery like, accept everyone, but the statement in and of itself is antithetical to what debate is, because debate is meant to be a contested space,
Mhm.
right? It's meant to be a space in which ideas are supposed to clash, that all ideas are welcome, hypothetically. And then from there, we tease out which ones are the most persuasive through technique and execution. So, how it could be more inclusive, right? Create more formats. Like, that's probably the easiest answer is if you make more events. And if you, for instance, make an event that is just specifically, let's have like a social justice, event,
Mhm.
then more people would debate. Maybe more people would like that style. Now, the problem is, even in that solution, because this is the debater in me, as I'm telling you, yeah, this sounds good, Michi. It's like, here's the reason why, here's the DA.
Mhm.
Separate but equal is not better. It's not more inclusive.
Yeah.
It's just bigger. Resources are still spread across different events in different ways.
Mhm.
You could start a brand new league today, and that league be a really popular league, and you have a very high kind of saturation of minorities in that league. But if none of the colleges are doing that particular league, then how is that beneficial? How is it inclusive?
Yeah.
You see, so it's once again, I think we're in double-edged sword. I think the community is making strides to try to find ways to be more accessible
Mhm.
in the status quo, especially the kind of high school community. I think the college community's biggest terrain they need to fight for at this point would just be probably funding,
Hmm.
right? Our resources. So I think at the high school level, there's a lot of strides being made. Most tournaments now have a DEI coordinator or a person there that is there to help handle issues of conflict, whether it's social conflict or just other types of conflict. There's a reporting system. There's trainings that happen. I think every other month that are free to members. So I think the community's trying. The problem is going to be the ingredients that make the community, right? It's like the problem is going to be the people, and that
Yeah.
you have some people that believe that one way is right and the other ways are wrong, and that
Yeah.
anybody that does the other ways shouldn't be doing it. And like, I feel like debate kind of exists for both of those groups of people to contest their positions. So I don't know how to make it more inclusive. I can tell you adding another format would make it bigger. And if we think
Yeah.
that more numbers equals more inclusive, then that's the easiest way to make it more inclusive. But if your inclusivity question is really about how do we ensure that everyone is comfortable to be able to engage in the space, I think that is somewhat antithetical to what debate is. You do not get to be comfortable. That's the entire point from
Mhm.
both sides, right? You don't get to be, because that's not what life is.
Yeah.
Life is making tough decisions in uncomfortable situations, and debate trains us to do that.
That makes sense. I think that's a really interesting take, how in competitive activities like debate and stuff like that, it's like the entire idea is contesting things. So it's very difficult to be comfortable. Is it possible to, how do I word this? Is it possible to fully engage in debate and everything that it stands for, questioning ideas, contesting points? Is it possible to engage in all of that competitive activity and still be comfortable and still maybe even have a community of people that agree with you?
Those are two different questions, I feel like. So I'll answer both of them.
Okay.
So the idea of debate being so the first question is kind of like, if we take from the perspective that everything is contestable, is it possible to be able to engage and be comfortable?
Yeah.
And then I consider the second part of that to be, and if so, like, is it possible to build a people group in it to be
Mhm.
comfortable with? I think
Yeah.
that's what you're asking. Okay. So is it possible to engage in debate and still be comfortable, even if it's contestable? Yes. I'm going to say something that might be triggering to some folks, but it's true. Debate is a game. It's just a game. Which means when we're in that now that does not mean that it's impossible to be unethical while you're playing the
Yeah.
game, because you can be very unethical while you're playing, but it's a game. And you and I may be best friends, but if I were debating you and you got up and you made an argument about feminism, I'm reading anti-blackness against you.
Mhm.
Period. I have no problem with you whatsoever.
Mhm.
But for the hour and a half that we are debating, this is a performance that needs to persuade the judge that this particular perspective is the preferable.
Hmm.
If you approach debate, that debate is a game and somebody has to win and somebody has to lose, and if we just say this is really about whose argument is more persuasive, that we can both be right, but that does not mean that both of our solutions for fixing the problem is right. Like, we can both be right that exclusion exists. Whose path towards revolution gets here faster? That's who wins. So it's a performance. So from that perspective, can you be comfortable? I think most debaters go through an evolution. So when they start making arguments that are combative, or at least they feel that are combative, or they feel that they've attached social identity to our social location to, generally what happens is they get really upset. They get militant. They want to be combative. They're like, I don't like debaters. Oh yeah, you know, insert ism, you know?
Mhm.
And then they start winning. And then people just start talking to them, be like, I'm really interested in your argument, what's going on? And they begin to see that most of these people, yeah, they may not be like you, but they're not actually bad.
Mhm.
So then they start forming friendships, because then you'll work at a camp with this person that you've been debating against all this time, and like
Yeah.
you actually hang out with them. They're pretty cool, right? Or you know, some people start businesses or whatever else together. But what you'll begin to see is that your comfort level is really based on the student and what the student wants out of debate. The maturity of the student, right? Because you can be very intellectually mature, if you can understand extremely complex concepts, but the willingness to be vulnerable or to be open with another person takes a different type of maturity. So really, I think the student will determine whether or not they can have a people group or be comfortable. I think coaching helps with that process, because at times we may have to remind students, you're right, like I need you to be looking for examples of anti-blackness in the world, but they didn't skip giving you napkins because you're black. That's not, that person just forgot, right? It's not that deep. So sometimes perspective is extremely important. And I think it really depends on where the student is and where their perspective is and whether or not they develop a people group that they migrate towards. I think naturally it happens if other students are making, or other teams are making similar arguments as you. You just kind of naturally float to those individuals. So then you develop friendships with them, and then maybe you don't like this other group of people because somebody in the group don't like them, and like that stuff happens. But comfort level is primarily based on um, you being able to embrace that debate as a game, and then
Mhm.
your level of maturity.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So these groups that people form somewhat
Mhm.
naturally in debate, are
Mhm.
they important to engaging in the activity?
Yeah, well, definitely. As long as the groups are not toxic. So
Yeah.
a disclaimer is the assumption is that these groups are mutually beneficial.
Mhm.
Right? You get something from them, and they kind of contribute some. Like, you get something from them, and then you give to the group too. The best example I can think of is a lot of times, and it really started happening. I remember when I was first debating, there were examples of people that were making race-based arguments. And my partner and I, when I debated in college, primarily made race-based arguments.
Yeah.
And there was obviously people that was doing it before us, but the big difference was it's like where we were. We were at a private white Christian university with a whole white coaching staff. And we were over here wanting to make arguments about race. And I had no one to coach me. I had
Mhm.
no one to explain to me the way that I should think about debate. It was either me losing early enough to get out, to go watch some really good teams do it and be like, oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, you're right. Oh, I can do this too. So community does that, right? Because what we found is that when students stand up and they say, oh, I've always wanted to say this, but I just never had the confidence that I could say it. I didn't know how to say it.
Yeah.
Community kind of helps give you that voice.
Mhm.
So and even something like a podcast like this that you could simply and easily watch. And I've been trying to be very careful about what I said because of this, because the Bills community, if they're like, ooh, Ben Hagwood going to talk about race, coaches will watch it. And then they're going to take the part. Look, this is what's going to happen. They're going to be like, no one's going to watch the video. They're going to take the part earlier where I said that what? I said that you have to talk about the topic. They're going to edit that part and say that you have to be topical. And then they're going to edit the part and say that debate is just a game, because they're going to use that to beat the teams. But I always put that in context, right? The topic part was in context, and
Mhm.
debate as a game is also in context. And when we recognize that the context exists, that's important. I need to say that out loud for all the people that are listening that might try to steal my words. But the kind of the yeah, I think yeah, I don't even know. I'm so distracted by the fact that I'm like, oh my God, somebody might actually try to edit this nonsense. But okay, anyway. Um, I'm sorry, what was the question? What was the question?
It was about how community is important to debate.
Oh, yeah. That's my story. That's what it was.
Yeah.
So access to resources.
Mhm.
When you have people in the community that are making similar arguments, sometimes they may not even be a coach for your team.
Yeah.
But what happens is you begin to find community because they hear your argument. And it works very similar to, if you think about the way research works in school.
Yeah.
So let's say we were all researching the cure for some incurable disease, and there was only like 20 of us in the entire world that would know. Well, we would know each other. All of us would know each other because we're doing a very specific thing. And debate works the same exact way. It's when you start exploring these types of arguments, you gravitate to people around you that naturally make those same arguments. And these communities come places where students get coaching. Students, if they're in trouble at tournaments, can get help. It's been situations where I know for a fact, like, students, their coaches got on flights, and they were left at the airport, like they didn't have a way to pay for food and stuff. So it's just like what you do is you start building a community, and you figure out that sometimes when we make arguments, it does the one thing that I think unites people, which is first, it creates commonality,
Mhm.
and second, it becomes much easier to understand and to violate a person that is not in that group's sense of justice when they're introduced to it. Right? When you have a person that's with a group of people that experience discrimination all the time, and then you bring another person in that's not part of that people group, and they see it and they're like, why did they just do that for y'all? And everybody's like, I mean, come on, like it's Tuesday for us. Right? But the community part, so it gives you kind of all of that. It gives you kind of a whole garden of experiences, support. And I think that network is so huge, especially for success in debate too, unless you have a really dynamic coach.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So besides these communities forming naturally, whether it's because of students reading similar arguments or just, seeing each other on circuit, admiring each other, how can current students get more involved in creating a community and fostering this sense of like, I guess like mutual benefit and helping other people, even if you guys are competitors, like in a round or something like that? How can students get more involved in creating this community?
Well, I mean, I would say, so wait, let me write that down because I have like several like this. So more involved. All right. So I think first, access to information is probably the most important part. And not access to information like debate arguments, but just like actual resources that students could use, whether that's a list of scholarships that are available to them or grants that they can apply for as individuals to ensure they get access to things like camps or scholarships at camps or anything, if it's competitive based. If it's more of a social thing that you just want to build community and you actually want to have an actual community and it's not about competition, then social media is an amazing platform for that. Make Facebook groups or meta groups, or I don't know if Instagram has groups. I'm not cool enough to have my Instagram situation understood yet. But if there are ways, Discord, if there are ways to create different areas where everyone could join and just it'd be accessible, then I think we begin to move in that direction. I think an issue that we might run into is like gatekeeping, because there's positive and negative, aspects to gatekeeping. But I think social media is probably the greatest platform for that. I think a radical idea, most tournaments won't agree to do this, but a very radical idea would be eliminating one of the preliminary debates. And instead of having debates, nothing but debates, have kind of a social time where students literally can just stand around and interact with coaches in a big kind of open forum. That would definitely go a far way to build community, because think about it, the only time we're all gathered in one place is to figure out who won the top speaker. That's it, right? Or who wins the final round. The rest of the time, we're all doing our own thing. We're not engaged. And also, it's the fact that at tournaments, competition never stops. Even while you're talking to your friend, if someone yells pairings are out, the conversation is over, and now you're focused on who am I debating. So if instead you create a buffer for that, so for instance, round 6 of the tournament, so the Saturday night, instead of having another round, let's just have a big dinner. We'll serve a bunch of food and people can sit around and just talk. And we invite everybody to do it. Then I think you start to build more community. I think that I think there is community in debate already. I'll say that. I think the goal of 100% community is unrealistic, because you're always going to have groups of people that will be you know, anti any group event, anti community. So I think the real question here, when you're really starting thinking about it, is how do we I'm trying to think about how to say this because I think community obviously exists. You and I are having a conversation right now,
Yeah.
right? Because
Mhm.
community exists. Um, and I think that's good. Now I don't know what it means. Like it's if you have four other friends that are going to do a podcast, I don't know that I would get on their podcast and talk to them. Not because I don't want to, right? But because that's not the community aspect that exists. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
community already exists. I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe what we need to focus on doing is advertising how it does better.
Yeah.
Because at first I was going to say maybe we should focus on encampments. And the main reason why I want to say encampments is because they're mobile. They move from place to place and they attract attention intentionally. And sometimes you want to do that. You want to let other students know who may not fit in with the crowds they're with, that debate is actually a space that although you don't fit in with everybody, there's a group here for you. And that group is part of the whole group. And we need all of the groups together to work. It's like a pizza. You take take one of the flavors out, not a good pizza, right? So I think that's the way that I would approach it. Is I would approach it as kind of trying to find ways to celebrate and enjoy, you know, the communities that we have and find ways of integrating those communities with one another slowly. And then we have the national tournament, which I say would be the integration of all of those ideas clashing together at once.
Yeah.
Um, um, so yeah, it's more about the recognition process, I think, than anything else.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So broader than making these communities, like broader than advertising these communities and making them more accessible, why is making debate accessible also important for students?
I truly believe that debate um, trains students, it provides them with all of the necessary soft skills to succeed.
Mhm.
Written and oral communication skills, critical thinking, problem solving, negotiation skills. These are all core skills that are needed, but more importantly, emotional intelligence is an extremely important skill. And debate forces you to quickly to become aware of your social surroundings, of your emotional surroundings, of you understanding and navigating how to communicate with people. And in a business setting, in an academic setting, at a college, these are invaluable skills. So getting access to debate just means that you practice negotiating and evaluating kind of what's happening around you, which makes you overall a person that is really just able to think and then
Yeah.
communicate the things they're thinking. And one of the most difficult things, like right now, like running an academy, one of the most difficult things is sometimes just getting staff to simply say what they want.
Mhm.
And I tell them every day, we cannot be a speech and debate academy if we cannot communicate with parents. We
Mhm.
can't be it, right? So we have to figure it out. And debate really teaches them those fine kind of skills.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And it sounds like these skills can also help with other forms of mobility. Like if students are under-resourced or underprivileged, they can
Mhm.
use skills that they learn in debate to kind of move up, to get a good job, to go to a good college, stuff like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
which is also really, really important.
Right.
So
Yeah.
overall, how can students right now get more involved in debate, or students that aren't in the community right now get involved in debate?
Well, so if you live in the United States, or if you live in, if I guess no matter where you live,
Yeah.
the first thing would be getting support from a teacher at your school. Generally, schools will require that you have a single person, teacher sponsor a club. Once you get the club set up, all you have to do after that is get your friends to join. And then some events you don't even have to get friends to join because you can debate by yourself. So the easiest way to get involved in debate would just be ask a teacher to support you in going. If you live in the United States or you have access to the National Speech and Debate Association, They make it pretty easy to attend tournaments because they put them all on one website called Tab Room.
Mhm.
So once you make your Tab Room account and you have a school attached to your name, you can sign up to go to tournaments that are already online. So the accessibility for debate is kind of wide open. The biggest thing is we have to get people have to know that it exists and they have to kind of know how it operates. And then generally you just need support from your local school district. And after that, you can debate. If you can't get support from your local school district, students can also contact NSDA directly. And NSDA will help them in the process of actually being able to set up a charter in their school, or at least putting them in contact with someone that can.
Okay, that's really cool. I didn't know that students could directly contact NSDA resource.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, overall, thank you so much for being on the podcast tonight. I learned a lot about debate, even though I've been debating for years. I've learned a lot about it tonight. So thank you so much for your time and for being on here. This is a great podcast. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me and good luck in the future. I look forward to seeing and hopefully listening to a couple more of these podcasts when you
Yeah, of course. Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you so much.
No problem.